What if I told you that one of history's most feared dictators was also one of the strangest men to ever walk the earth? Adolf Hitler, the man who plunged the world into war and orchestrated the Holocaust, wasn't just a political tyrant. Behind closed doors, he lived a life filled with bizarre habits, strange routines, and secrets that few ever talk about. From his obsessive diet, to his strange superstitions, to the odd way he treated those closest to him, Hitler's private life was far more unusual than most people realize. And today, we're going deep inside the bizarre life of Adolf Hitler, revealing the strange details about the man that history books often leave out. Stay with me until the end, because what Hitler did in his final days inside the bunker will absolutely shock you. To understand Hitler's weird habits later in life, we have to rewind to his childhood. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, Austria. Even as a child, people noticed something unusual about him. His father, Alois, was strict and often violent. His mother, Clara, was soft, protective, and overly indulgent. This combination left young Adolf with a strange dual personality. He craved authority, but he also desperately needed comfort. One bizarre detail? As a teenager, Hitler was obsessed with art and architecture. He would spend hours sketching buildings, daydreaming about becoming a famous painter. But when he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, he was rejected, not once, but twice. This rejection would haunt him, and some historians believe it played a role in shaping his unusual personality and bitterness toward society. But Hitler wasn't just obsessed with art. He also became fascinated with German nationalism and mythology. In Vienna, he read books about race, history, and the occult, strange interests that gave him a sense of belonging. He also developed an odd routine in those years, spending whole days in libraries, barely eating, wandering the streets lost in thought. Neighbors described him as weird, a loner, shabby-looking, always mumbling to himself. Even his personal hygiene was questionable. He often wore the same clothes for days and neglected bathing, something that would continue later in life. By the time he moved to Munich in 1913, Hitler was already living a life very different from ordinary young men of his age. While others were working, studying, or socializing, Hitler was obsessively reading, sketching, and forming ideas that were both extreme and unusual. But his odd behavior didn't stop in youth. As Hitler rose to power, his habits became stranger and stranger, from a bizarre vegetarian diet, to an extreme fear of doctors, to a disturbing obsession with astrology and the occult. As Hitler climbed to power in Germany, his private life became more peculiar. Behind the speeches, parades, and military planning, he lived in a strange bubble, controlled by odd habits and routines that shocked even his closest companions. One of the most bizarre aspects of Hitler's lifestyle was his diet. By the 1930s, Hitler had embraced vegetarianism. He claimed it was for health reasons, but some historians believe it was also connected to his obsession with purity and control. At dinner, Hitler would often lecture his guests about the cruelty of meat eating, describing slaughterhouses in gruesome detail while everyone else tried to eat. It made many uncomfortable, but nobody dared to object. But his vegetarian diet wasn't simple. He ate strange combinations of food, like mashed potatoes with raw vegetables, or soup thickened with flour and egg yolks. He also had a sweet tooth, consuming piles of pastries and cakes. His staff joked that he could eat an entire box of chocolates in one sitting. Hitler also suffered from severe digestive problems. He complained constantly of stomach cramps, bloating, and gas, to the point that his personal doctor, Theodor Morell, kept him on a cocktail of bizarre medications. These included everything from laxatives to injections of vitamins, hormones, and even questionable drugs that today would raise eyebrows. Some historians argue that Morell's treatments, which included strange concoctions of animal extracts, may have contributed to Hitler's increasingly unstable behavior. But it wasn't just his diet that was odd. Hitler had a very strange daily routine. Unlike most leaders, who woke up early to tackle state affairs, Hitler often stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning, watching films, listening to music, or talking endlessly with his inner circle. He was obsessed with movies, especially American ones. Charlie Chaplin was a favorite. It's ironic, considering Chaplin would later mock Hitler in The Great Dictator. After these late nights, Hitler usually woke up late, sometimes around noon. He would then eat a simple breakfast, often tea with biscuits, and spend much of the afternoon in long discussions rather than structured meetings. Even his work style was unusual. Instead of keeping a strict schedule, he relied on sudden bursts of energy, followed by hours of laziness. Ministers and generals often complained that it was nearly impossible to predict when Hitler would be available. Another bizarre habit was his fear of illness. Hitler was a hypochondriac, constantly worrying about being poisoned or infected. His staff had to test his food before he ate, and he carried strict rules about hygiene. Yet ironically, his own personal hygiene wasn't always perfect. He rarely visited dentists, avoided doctors unless absolutely necessary, and sometimes refused to bathe regularly. Hitler also had peculiar mannerisms. When he spoke privately, he often launched into long, rambling monologues, repeating the same stories over and over. Guests at his dinner table sometimes endured hours of one-sided speeches about history, architecture, or Wagner's operas. Speaking of Wagner, Hitler was obsessed with music, particularly the works of Richard Wagner. He claimed that Wagner's operas inspired his vision of a powerful, heroic Germany. He would listen to them at deafening volume, sometimes with tears in his eyes, completely lost in the music. These quirks painted a picture of a man who wasn't just ruthless, but also deeply eccentric, someone living in a strange, isolated reality of his own making. But Hitler's weirdness didn't stop at diet, music, or routine. His private beliefs and secret obsessions were even stranger. From a fascination with astrology and the occult, to bizarre superstitions that shaped his decisions during World War II, Hitler's life only grew more mysterious. If Hitler's daily habits seemed strange, his personal beliefs and obsessions were even more bizarre. Hitler wasn't just a dictator driven by politics, he was also fascinated by the mystical, the supernatural, and the unexplainable. One of his strangest obsessions was with astrology and fortune-telling. During the war, Hitler often consulted astrologers, numerologists, and even mystics to predict the outcomes of battles or political decisions. He believed in lucky numbers and sometimes adjusted his strategies based on them. He also had an odd interest in the occult. Members of his inner circle, like Heinrich Himmler, were heavily involved in occult practices, and while Hitler sometimes mocked them, he also shared their fascination with ancient symbols, mythology, and mysticism. For example, the swastika, one of the most infamous symbols in history, was taken from ancient religious traditions and rebranded as a symbol of Nazi power. Hitler also surrounded himself with myths about a so-called Aryan race, drawing inspiration from Nordic legends and pseudo-scientific theories. His worldview wasn't just political, it was drenched in bizarre fantasies of bloodlines, purity, and mystical destiny. Another obsession? Wagner's operas and Germanic mythology. Hitler treated Wagner almost like a prophet. He believed Wagner's music expressed the spirit of the German people. Some evenings, Hitler would lock himself away just to listen to operas for hours, completely consumed. But Hitler's strangeness wasn't only intellectual, it was deeply personal too. Behind closed doors, Hitler lived a life of secrecy and control. His relationships with women were especially strange. Hitler never married until the very last day of his life, when he wed Eva Braun in the Berlin bunker. Before that, their relationship was hidden from the public. Eva Braun lived in the shadows, kept away from political life, rarely seen in public, and constantly isolated. Hitler believed that presenting himself as unmarried made him more appealing as a father figure to the German people. But Eva wasn't the only unusual relationship in Hitler's life. He had an unhealthy pattern with women. Many of the women close to him suffered from depression, and some even died by suicide or under mysterious circumstances. Historians argue that Hitler's controlling and emotionally distant nature played a major role. Even with Eva, Hitler's lifestyle was peculiar. He demanded strict loyalty and obedience, yet offered little intimacy. Their time together often involved watching movies, eating meals, or listening to music late into the night, but almost always on Hitler's terms. He also kept his private quarters extremely controlled. At his mountain retreat, the Berghof, visitors described the atmosphere as both luxurious and strangely sterile. Hitler controlled the decor, the schedules, even the conversations. He hated smoking and banned it in his presence. He demanded that his dogs, particularly his beloved German shepherd, Blondie, be treated with utmost care. In fact, Hitler was oddly affectionate with animals. He adored dogs, was kind to his pets, and promoted animal protection laws in Nazi Germany. It's one of the strangest contradictions in his life. A man capable of mass murder, yet sentimental about dogs and strongly opposed to animal cruelty. Even his conversations at home were bizarre. Guests often described long, one-sided lectures where Hitler would ramble for hours about obscure topics, architecture, art, history, or his visions for the future. Few dared to interrupt him, and many secretly dreaded being invited to dinner. This combination of eccentric beliefs, obsessive control, and unusual private life painted a picture of a man who wasn't just dangerous, but deeply odd in ways most people never saw. But perhaps the strangest part of all was the way Hitler spent his final days. Trapped in the Berlin bunker, surrounded by chaos, Hitler's habits and fears grew even stranger. His last weeks were filled with paranoia, bizarre routines, and shocking decisions that revealed just how unusual and unstable he truly was.